Welcome to episode 20 of the Hard Truth About B2B eCommerce. I'm your co-host, Isaiah Belanger, and I'm here with our great co-host, Tim.
Well, thank you for that, Isaiah. I'm glad to be called a great co-host. So, welcome. Is this season 2? Is that what you were saying, Isaiah?
Yeah. We're on episode 20, which we will officially deem season 2 and start to kind of shift our focus a little bit as we feel like we've kind of covered a lot of ground, and now we're kind of in the next phase of topics we want to cover. So,
well, it's been really exciting. This run has been great, and I've been having so much fun with our guests. It's nice to kind of just regroup a little bit and have a chat just with you. But before that, I'm going to actually get back to our sponsor because I don't want to forget them at the head of season 2 as well. So our sponsor is Punch Out To Go. And they are a global B2B integration company specializing in connecting commerce business platforms with e-procurement and ERP applications. And Punch Out To Go's iPaaS technology seamlessly links business applications to automate the flow of purchasing data. With their solution, you can immediately reduce integration complexities for punch-out catalogs, electronic purchase orders, invoices, and other B2B sales order automation documents. Thank you once again to Punch Out To Go, and now Isaiah, back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about this kicking off a season 2, and it's good timing because we decided to kind of do our own without a guest, similar to kind of the first episode where we kicked it off and kind of intro the podcast. And I guess the way I'd like to kind of preface season 2 is season 1 was, we were just kind of getting into the basics of what B2B e-commerce really is and how to help people and why it's different than B2C. And a lot of that was very operational, integrating with the ERP, making sure you've thought through product data, choosing the right platform, kind of maybe having a little bit more of an agile mindset, trying to kind of build that culture for people to start thinking about the right things for B2B e-commerce. And now we want to kind of start to broaden that into the marketing side of things. So let's say you got through that painful process of getting your site up, on whatever platform it may be. What do you do from there, right? Like, how do you actually grow it? And
good question, right?
How do you make it useful, right? So, with that being said, Tim, I'm curious to kind of hear what your thoughts are on kind of like plans and actions and what you would do.
Sure.
Like, let's say you're a month after launch and you've got a new site, and it's like, well, what do you do now? Like,
Sure. Well, I'll give our listeners a couple scenarios because I know people are coming from different perspectives, and maybe some folks are literally startups and others are a different phase of their business development. So, let's say you're in one scenario where you're really young and it's early. It's very important at that stage to understand a lot of basics that will probably help the whole business and help your marketing approach no matter what you do later on. And a lot of that is really getting deep into the branding. Like what really are you about? What is the company? What is your product about? What are your services about? And does your site reflect it, or will your site reflect that? Your B2B e-commerce approach has got to fit, whatever that means, and we can talk about the details. It's got to fit with whatever your brand is about. It can't be some super complicated, high-tech, online experience if you're trying to, go after something that's easy as 1, 2, 3. It's got to. That's just kind of a very oversimplified way of looking at it. That's one scenario, and we could talk about that. And then the second that I would say is, you're further along. It's what you were kind of saying at the head, where you've already built this new environment, or you really are proud of your investment in something that's bringing you to the next level. So you put money into a great e-commerce experience on whatever platform. Well, now what do you do with it, right? So the question has got to become, how do you set up processes to do this ongoing, right? Because it's never one and done, right? That's a key thing in marketing. I think I've learned everywhere I've always been, because marketing today is different from 5 years ago, and marketing is different today from 10 years ago, and it's going to be different another 5 years. We don't know what that is, so you've got to be flexible in your thinking, and you've got to be, really open to possibilities. So it could be social media, it could be email, it could be marketplaces, and we could talk about those in detail, but I'd say that's the second takeaway, is that get that innovation process down in your business so you understand.
Yeah, I think that's really important, that once you're live, you put the process in place where you're constantly improving and testing new ideas, whether it's a new Google advertisement, and you don't just put up an advertisement and let it sit for six months or a year. Like, you test it, try variations, try different keywords, whatever it is you're doing, you're kind of like constantly iterating on those different things with the new site, new features, testing the same. Maybe it's just modifying existing features to make them better. I totally agree. I think you kind of have to put that process in place, and we're actually right in the middle of that. We launched our new site like almost 2 months ago, and it still feels like it's brand new. Like, we're still kind of working out some bugs and kinks and things like that. But like, we have kind of a pretty decent sized backlog, so there's just always stuff to do to chip away and improve what we have.
Well, you brought up something really interesting, because you're going through it, live basically here at Trellis right now. And, from my perspective, working with you and kind of comparing it to what other, folks might be doing out in B2B, you are doing it right. And it's not just because I like you and I'm on this podcast, right? You've taken this approach where there's a lot of thought into it. You're wondering, how does this reflect our brand and who we are and where we're going? So that's critical. And also, you're thinking about tech and tools and exactly how we're looking at things and how we're talking to new audiences and current clients. And so it's really the whole package. That's what you got to work through. And it's not going to be like one day where you sit down and have like a meeting, right? It's a process.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I think, there's a lot of topics that we wanted to cover, but I think that's what makes B2B e-commerce marketing a lot more complicated, is that the way I would approach it, if I, let's say I was a manufacturer or distributor, which are, the two most common scenarios, or wholesaler, is you have kind of like the website and digital marketing side of things, but you also have like your sales and relationship, traditional B2B side of things, and they kind of need to like merge more closely together, because they're almost one and the same. Like, I'm starting to kind of believe in the idea of like the whole like business development rep, or the person kind of like going out and reaching out to people. Like, in a lot of ways, it's marketing. You're just doing it manually. You're manually reaching out to a lot of people versus doing a Facebook ad that targets them specifically, and I think the more you can kind of like combine these two approaches where they're complementing each other, will really help the B2B companies grow with e-commerce, because sales will help, influence the site, and then marketing will help make sales easier, and they're kind of more intertwined. And right now, I think that's a challenge that a lot of these companies haven't quite figured out properly. They're still struggling with that, from what I've seen. Most of the time.
And no, exactly. They are struggling with this. And it's funny, because some folks I've talked to, you kind of take a step back and you say, what does marketing really mean to you? And it's an interesting question, because for some folks, they go right to advertising, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I market my business by doing, paid ads on LinkedIn, Facebook, through paid Google stuff, whatever. And that's not all marketing, right? That's one component. It's one piece. And I think the most successful approach for B2B really ties in with what you're saying. It's like, marketing has a sales component. It has a client success component. It has a branding component. All of these pieces that have got to be done. So it's not like you're saying, okay, I have a marketing plan and here's my promotional budget for paid search marketing, right? That's not it. There's so much more to it, in all of those areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I think you need to kind of unify these different things so they're all kind of tied together, where the site is evolving and marketing is bringing in new people. I think actually our guest that we had a few episodes ago was at Wolf Automation. I think they were moving in the right direction, where the site was very B2C in a way, like it would get a lot of people in, and then if someone buys, like, sales reps can go and call them up, and like maybe they spent $2,000, but the sales rep should try and turn them into $100,000 customer. Like, that should be your leads. Like the website should be kind of like part of your lead generation, whether it's SEO, PPC, email marketing, and we can kind of get into those details a little bit. And then your sales team can be, calling up these customers, like, or, obviously some of them might submit a form and say, hey, like, might ask questions on a contact form, and that's just like a generic lead. But some people like might just buy something, or I guess it depends if the company has made it guest checkout friendly or consumer friendly.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, that's important.
yeah, which I think that more B2B companies should move in that direction and think of it as lead gen, because a lot of them don't do it because they want to, protect their pricing, but if they think about it more as lead generation for the sales team, then you can probably make a stronger case for offering it in some way
Well, I'll give you an example from a company that I was talking about recently. I don't know if you're familiar with Generac. They make generators, right? I mean, it's a very straightforward, seemingly industrial sounding thing. But, there is a big B2C component, because some time ago they started making generators for homes and for, just like to cover for power outages. And
yeah, my mom has one, and she's in Western Massachusetts, so.
Oh yeah, so you understand this, but the lesson I think for a lot of our listeners is that, well, you think generator, right, and you think B2B, right? That is something I think that most people would say. It's like, oh yeah, generator. It's very like this tech thing, this piece of machinery. But they kind of play with this in many, many ways, and there are all pieces of their process that reflect on exactly what we're talking about here. So if you're going to one of their landing pages or one of the sites, maybe you'll end up being directed to Home Depot. Maybe it'll direct you back to your power company, or the oil company. If you have oil heat at your home that says, gee, did you know you can also buy a generator? All of these things, right? And then there are all the business applications, like for schools, for housing complexes, condominium complexes, office buildings, that also get these generators. So they have all these different angles, and then they have bots, that are directing people one way or another and saying, oh, what are you interested in? Are you just like an individual homeowner, or are you something else, right? And it's great how that works, because it's conversational. It's not complicated. Nobody's turned away. It's just you follow a path.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So let's get into some of the
Let's do it.
specifics here for people, like maybe a little bit more tactical.
Yeah.
So maybe kind of combining two of these topics.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of companies in the B2B space are typically been around for a while. Like it's less like D2C, where you see these you don't see a lot of like startup distributors or startup manufacturers. Obviously they exist, but a lot of them have been around for a while. And one thing I've noticed is a lot of them, you can kind of tell they haven't gone through a brand refresh in a while.
Yeah, I know.
Some may have, and some may haven't. But if you were trying to kind of revamp your branding and your content, I think they kind of have to go hand in hand in some degree. Where would you start? You were.
Oh yeah, I'll be real tactical on this one. Let's get real tactical. So, and we could pick a company as an example, if we want to do that. But one of the things I would say, no matter what you do, product or service in B2B, is that, you got to have a story. There's got to be a narrative, right? Everything is about the story. And, you want to have a story that actually makes sense to both your workers and to your current clients or your potential clients, right? It's everybody, internal, external. So you write down that story, and it's not hard to see where the gaps are. It's like, well, what's the once upon a time? Where did you come from, right? Why are you here? What are you addressing? How are you the hero, and how are your competitors the villains, right? You know,
Yeah.
like, what is it, right? Hero and villain. And then what are the ways in which you're proving that you can solve, problems for all of your clients or your potential clients? And then, the punchline is, well, really, how do people live happily ever after? It's the fairy tale test, is the simplest, most tactical thing in narrative content creation that I've ever learned over the years. It can get much more complicated, but it's a great exercise to start putting yourself through. You apply each of those steps and you just go.
Yeah, I love that, because as a B2B business, if you're doing that, I think it'll kind of also help you think about your competitive advantage, because if your story, and I think a lot of them have a similar stories where it's like, we make, buying these supplies, we're your electrical distributor supplier, and we solve all your needs in that, in that niche, or pool supplies, or it could be whatever it may be from a supply standpoint, or it could be some sort of niche manufacturing type thing that they provide. And if the story is, we're the most affordable or the most, best service, it's like, are you really doing that? And what's backing that up? Like, is it, it's easy to get a hold of someone on the phone every 24/7. Is that actually true? And then you can start to like analyze, like, are we really doing all this? Or maybe the website's not supporting that because it's actually not that easy to get a hold of us for whatever reason. Like, I think it's a good way to kind of like really back up the story that you're telling and see if your website or the technology behind it is supporting that in a smart way.
And other tactical ways to apply this content creation. So let's just, we can take it step by step to be real super useful. Like, we want to be useful to our listeners, right? If you go through an approach where you're creating this content story and you're believing it and it's real and there's great stuff there, then you sit down and you say, well, how do we use this component, our origin story, how we are different or better than our competitors? What are we offering to make people live happily ever after, right? You take each of these components, you say, well, what do I do with it? What am I doing in social media? How am I addressing paid search? What type of terms do I want to use out of my narrative to use, out in the world, right? So you're taking this back and forth. So again, I never want to oversimplify this. People spend their entire careers working at it, but it really is that kind of a process where you say, oh, well, I'm not really doing that. And there's this whole gap. I'm not telling people where I came from or why I'm here, right? I'm just not. It's something I've missed in my business.
Yeah. And then I think you're kind of getting into the channels, and that's where I think it's really important to kind of solidify that messaging. And maybe it's a little bit different depending on, like, we're going through this where, we offer a lot of different services, and that's common for many different companies. So you might have, 5 different angles depending on the type of company, but where are you gonna, like, I think it's good to experiment, and then after you've experimented, maybe you've tried LinkedIn, Facebook, Google Ads, a bunch of different things, and maybe direct sales too. Find like a mix of those that are working, and then double down on those. I think especially if you're not a very large, sophisticated company, trying to do every channel really, really well is probably a little overwhelming. Like, trying to do, be the best SEO, email marketing, PPC, social, like, all the channels really well can be challenging. So I like to recommend picking maybe 2 or 3 to focus, not ignore the others, but, pick the 2 or 3 that you're like, hey, we're seeing results on this. Let's just keep investing in it because it's working. And
it's the rule of 3, right? I mean, people talk about this in B schools, and they're not necessarily wrong, right? You start with 3, channels, or 3 programs per channel, and 3 promotions per program per channel, or whatever way you break things up. But you basically, everyone has to agree. You have to address sales, and you have to address current customers. And, these things are pieces of the funnel, right? Like how people work
Yep.
through your business. But beyond that, you do have to make choices. So I always say, start with 3, have 3 on deck, continue to test, all this kind of stuff. You don't have to have 48 things when you launch a business. You just don't have.
Yeah, exactly. And then make those profitable, get SEO successful or whatever it is,
Yeah.
Google ads. Once they're more mature, then you can kind of like say, all right, let's try out like this 4th channel more, or let's spend more on this 4th channel or 5th channel, because the other 3 are already, humming along, and you can kind of take some more risks on some other newer things or different things, and that's.
Yeah, and what happens, and again, all of this is logical, but sometimes people don't kind of process it in this way in their mind. But there's this combination power, right? This convergence power that happens. So
Yep.
if you're telling this story consistently and you're telling it well, and you're using these terms and these images and these videos, talk about video, right? All these things, and you're just building out from some core, they all feed on each other. So, I was working with a B2B client not too long ago, and they were really reluctant to use more social anything, either like an influencer or, a paid ads and Instagram or Facebook or whatever. I mean, or LinkedIn even. Like, they were kind of reluctant, and not clear why. Well, it turned out that it was a complete natural, because a lot of their customers wanted the stories, and the story component of social is so powerful. People share, they want to show pictures, they want to talk, they want to join something that's a live event. It's so powerful for a lot of businesses. It's not just, as we know, it's not at all just about like our personal lives. It's powerful. Social's powerful for business.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's add to that a little bit. Like, I think, let's say you're kind of, that company that's like, social's not going to work for me because I sell parts, and, it's like some, for lack of a better word, kind of boring behind the scenes thing. So no one cares on Facebook about the parts that I sell or that I manufacture or whatever. What have you seen that's worked in some of these, or what would you recommend for some company that kind of thinks of themselves as not like a, fun B2C type brand, and so they don't believe in social media?
I'll give you a couple quick scenarios, just are great like ways these things have worked. So there's I can't think what the term is, ADAA compliance, the American
Yep.
Disabilities Act, ADA compliance. It's critical. It's not just about doing something that is connected to a law, but it's doing something that's right, for all people, and for all workers, for all potential customers. So there's a B2B business that I came across that basically, their whole world is going to offices, working with stores, working with restaurants, working with schools, and making sure that they are up to the highest standards possible for accessibility, for egress, during fires and all this kind of stuff. Really critical stuff, but it's not easy, right? You have to have these plans, and you have to know door widths and all this stuff, right? And it also may not sound like, gee, you're going to see something about this on Instagram. However, what they do is they focus on stories about people and how much it matters when these things are done. So, people who have a challenge, right? It's something that they need help with. You're in a wheelchair, and there are only stairs in front of you, right? So they work with that person, and they talk about how that person's life changes by having things occur. And so in social, it's real, it's human, it's so positive, and people are really engaged by it. I haven't hired any of these folks for the types of jobs that I've done recently. However, this company is just great. It's just absolutely wonderful that they're doing stuff like that in social. And that's a great example, I think. Like, it's not.
So if you're kind of like this parts supplier or whatever,
Mhm.
you would create a story out of like, hey, our, this guy's warehouse was down or their machine was broken and they couldn't serve these people, and we got them the part in time, fixed the, the oil pipeline or whatever, so the jobs could come back online, or like, you create the story around how what you did at the end result kind of story behind it. And
exactly. Because, when you think about it, nothing is really that exciting. Like, fabric for clothes and metal for jewelry. And, this stuff isn't that exciting. It's how people play it and talk about what it does for your life, right? And what does it really do for you? It makes you feel good. It's structural or functional. And so I think a lot of B2B players really have just, again, got to take a deep breath and say, well, okay, how are we changing things for people for the better? To help them make more money, to improve their lives, to improve accessibility, whatever it is, and then talk about it. And that is why social media can work, either just in content creation or getting influencers who talk about that stuff and advocate, or in paid ads in social media.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about content, and then we'll come back because I want to talk about the marketing and sales, stuff a little bit more. But going back to content, we've talked a lot about this, I think, on the podcast. Product data is like one of the most, like, so critical. Like, if you don't have good product data, like, that's arguably where you should start. Like, if you're kind of early in B2B commerce, or you don't have a lot of sales and B2B commerce, like, that's probably where I would actually recommend spending the bulk of your time and money, is like just having the best possible product data. And that's where I think that companies should think of it as market. Like, and that's where this is kind of where I think B2B companies go wrong, is that they kind of like lump everything into like a department, or they look at it in a very like simple way where it's like, the website is the tech budget, or it's the marketing budget, or it's the operations budget, but it's really kind of like all of those things. So like, your content and your product data is operations, it's marketing, it's sales, and it's branding. Like, and you know what I mean? It's like all these different departments in one. And I think if you look at it that way, you can much more easily justify the right investment to get it done well, instead of kind of, for lack of a better word, I think it was, who is it that kept saying the penny pinching? It was, you remember the guest.
No, I'm thinking of it too. Sorry. Yeah.
One of our guests, saying that there's a penny pinching attitude sometimes in B2B. So I think if you think about content in a broader context, especially with product data, you can justify a better investment and do a better job of it, and you'll get better results. So I'm just kind of curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, a couple angles on what you just brought up, because again, these are all great topics that I think, we as a podcast and Trellis and a lot of other, we need to explore it, right? And get into deep dive into it. But a couple of things you brought up, I think, are really valuable. One is that, it's almost like marketers do themselves a disservice by naming things, right? And I like calling it content makes it seem like it's other, it's like over there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it really is, talking about product, telling the story, talking about business, telling that story, but putting that extra term on it, or even social media. When you call it social media, well, it really is just media, and you're just talking about it in a different place, right? It's not the strangest, newest thing ever anymore, right? So first of all, I got to say that. The second thing is, when you are, working really in the right way, like 100% together, and you are like the model company for this, what you'd be doing is really everybody is contributing to the conversation in some really, formal and regular way. So I've worked with a lot of companies in the health space, health and wellness. Our listeners have heard that before. In fashion. Well, what you got to do is you got to talk to the scientists who are creating these formulations, because there's a reason they'll put like a certain ingredient in that you can't pronounce, right? There's an actual reason. And so once you say, why is ashwagandha root, in this product, and what the heck is it? Then all of a sudden it becomes this really interesting story, and it's like, oh, I had no idea, right? That's really cool. And that's what it does for me and for my life. So it's that value that you immediately get, and then the value is just, exponential as you start building. You're talking to the scientists, the engineers, people in every piece of that business about what they do and why they do it.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. You're building this, it's like a micro story within each product, and you might have 100,000 products, or maybe it's only a couple hundred, but there's almost like a story within each one of those. So that's a really good way of thinking about it. So let's kind of go back to I think this is where there's also a big failure in B2B e-commerce, is that kind of combining sales and marketing and doing it in a way that sales is happy and you're not like killing all your salespeople. I mean, that's a common, I think it's like the third podcast where like the sales guy that we had, and he's like, the sales guy told him that he was the e-commerce site, and that he didn't believe, getting sales aligned in e-commerce has obviously like been like kind of that historical challenge. I think now it's a lot easier with COVID and people are kind of accepting it more. But I think where it's kind of failing is the idea that like the website is essentially a tool to make your customers buy more, and the sales reps are still important. I think the relationships are still important. They can be there to upsell customers or just make sure that they're using the site correctly or getting the most out of the site. So, I want to talk a little bit about that, because I think that's kind of where a lot of B2B is failing, is that sales is too separated from the site, or maybe sales is really involved in the site and marketing is too, like, they're just not unified enough between the two in terms of
and this is one of these things that we said at the beginning as well. There's a lot of ongoing innovation that's happening, and I think that's really helping a lot of people figure out how to do this better. One of the tools that I've seen most recently that works well is it's really it's a live commerce approach. Now, people call it different things. You can use different tech for it. But essentially what the live commerce approach is that you have this site where commerce can occur. And you have these people who can help push, clients through or have products or services sold. But what happens? Sometimes they're not there working together with the potential customers or clients or the current ones. They're just not. There's just this tech and there are these people. So one of the great ways to pull these together, people played with live chat for a long time and saying, hey, can we have somebody talk to you? Do you want somebody live? And that's great, and that works. But what's even worked better for some is the idea that you're saying, do you want to set up an appointment, and I'll do a 15-minute Zoom with you to review our product lines, or to talk about what the options are for you for the products and services that we sell. So it's a sales person who's creating these meetings through the e-commerce site and actually screen sharing. In some circumstances now, people will screen share and say, okay, now we're going to walk you through and I'll show you how to set up that account because you have these different needs in these different locations. Okay, great. I set it up for you.
Yeah, the concept of that corporate account. And I think that's where that hand-holding of sales, and I think that's kind of where the failing is B2B, sometimes they might be okay without having corporate accounts. They might be able to just have regular customer accounts, but then you're almost more B2C like with e-commerce. So B2B typically is moving in the direction of kind of like corporate accounts functionality, or maybe a special login with special wholesale pricing, or something a little bit special with your login, right? Like even Wayfair does this. We buy furniture from Wayfair, and they give you like, B2B pricing and things like that. But I think that's where that kind of like hand holding is so important, where the sales reps need to be able to know how it works, get on a Zoom. Like we have actually a customer that's, they were already on Shopify. So they've been trying to make Shopify work more and more for their B2B side of the business. And, we've talked about this in the podcast. Shopify is kind of a little bit weaker on the B2B side. It wasn't really originally designed for B2B, and they don't have as much core B2B functionality as some of the more enterprise stuff like Magento. But with some apps and some tweaking, we were able to get it to kind of where they needed it to be. But the challenge was more adoption here, but they were very open to it. They were one of the companies that I think is doing they're thinking about it the right way. So their head of sales is like, I guess I just got to talk to all the customers, and not all of them, but some of the ones that were like more resistant to the site, and just show them how to use the site, because they wanted more and more people they wanted to kind of get away from the calling up and ordering on things that should have just been going through the site. So sometimes you just got to call up, one by one and show them how to use the site and get them using. I mean, Apple does that. We buy through Apple, and it was a pretty manual process to get the site up and running. But now, we order through ecommerce.apple.com. We have like our business user that we buy through.
No, and exactly. I mean, so, and it's not so much like it's a B2C coming to B2B. It's really just, using what's out in the world and trying to adapt it to what really works. So, another just like variation on a theme here is that you got to think a bit about, like, you have a personal trainer, maybe you have a personal shopper, maybe you have, these people who are in your life who can help you with things in a certain way to kind of move you along, right? And that concept really works well for most B2B players. Whatever you're doing, you got to have somebody available and helping along. And you can kind of make canned versions of this where you have like the weekly setups for this, and this, and people could watch recordings and have a live person answering, but actually having the person available, and having them by name. So, meet with Tim to have you walk through X, Y, and Z, and here's my schedule this week. Let's just get it going, right? I mean, and people respond to that pretty well because they do want help, and why not learn more and do it that way?
Yeah, and I think it's a lot more attractive, especially for companies that are, a little bit more digitally native, like Trellis. Like, if you don't have like an easy way for us to buy from you online, or something that you can set us up with a portal, like, it's like almost guaranteed we're not going to buy from you. But if you walked us through, like, hey, we set you up with this online account, here's how you can add your employees and they can buy, the one-off t-shirts or whatever like kind of B2B thing that we're trying to do, all of a sudden we're like, oh, this is interesting. I mean, we do that with some promo stuff. There's so many use cases, right? So,
yeah,
so let's get into, I think this is another really interesting one. Well, we talked a little bit about some of the channels and we can kind of come back to that, but the promotions is one that I always find interesting because pricing and promotions is definitely complicated in B2B. And it's like, I guess I would say I've seen, like, these are the variations that I see. And then I want to hear kind of what you think about that and what you would do. But you have some companies that are just like, we're B2B, but we keep it simple and we just have list price and maybe like a wholesale price. And that's it. They have like a couple tiers, but it's like almost B2C with like a wholesale price, and it's very simple. And then you have kind of the opposite side of that, where you have some companies where it's like everything is negotiated price, quote, like request a quote, super custom pricing, like on almost like a per customer basis. And then you have kind of like the in between, where it's like different levels of wholesale, and maybe their big customers have custom pricing or they have special quotes for big things. It's kind of a mix of the two. Those are kind of and then what I see is that companies that do that, especially on the more custom side, they don't know how to leverage promotions because they're like, well, why would I have promotions? Everything's like negotiated. So there's promotion doesn't make sense because everything's negotiated in a quote, So
yeah, I mean, so a couple things, because some things are simply, how do I put it? Some things are just assumptions, and they're like ingrained in the way a lot of B2B happens, right? So they're having all of that mystery and that customization used to have a purpose, and historically some of that purpose was they couldn't give a price because they didn't know how much it would cost, right? You had to go out and you had to figure it out. It's like, okay, now we have the details and this is how we're going to have to source it all and pull it from this warehouse and do this, and right, they had to come up with something because they didn't have it available. There's almost no excuse for that today. It's a different world. You can have all this data available to you, as you know, right? So the complete mystery thing, more and more B2B customers are unhappy with that idea that everything's a mystery and everything's custom. They just don't buy it anymore, right? So that's one thing. Second thing, really quickly, is that, so how do you build in promotion? Well, it's not like, that Black Friday, event or whatever. It's really not, right?
20% off or 50% off. Yeah.
Like a version of Prime Day or something. That's not the idea. The idea of promotion for B2B is really specific to what you do, unlike some of these really general things. So if you have services, maybe you are introducing your service in kind of a pre-sale sort of way. Look, we're looking for 100 clients to try out something that we've never done before. And so while we're learning, we're giving you a better offer, and this lasts for 30 days, right? And we're going to just do this until we get 100 people to sign up, right? That's a legit, real promotion that I didn't just make up on the fly. Like, people do that kind of stuff. Same for product in B2B, where it's not so much like, the wholesale or the bulk buy or whatever. It may be, configurations or new releases or unique
bundling and kitting and
exactly, right? Bundling and kitting. Like, so you come up with these things that are very different, and you say, well, we're doing this and we wanted to sell these 24 different things together, right? As you're pointing out. And this is going to be this offer because this is the most common combination from our research that people actually buy when they buy the 24 things separately, right?
Yeah.
So you make
I think the bundling and kitting is a great way to do promotions in B2B, especially if you're not a manufacturer. Because if you're a manufacturer, you have a little more control over your pricing, and you can be unique through your own products and just like, I'm going to make the best product and that's how I'm unique. But when you're distributor or wholesaler, it's tougher because you don't make the product, right? So like, and you obviously want to do well with pricing so that you're competitive, but if you get too low, then you have no margins. But if you create like kind of these unique bundles that are useful for specific purposes, you're almost like creating a product without actually like building a product,
and the other reason to do all of these is that it brings attention to you. You are marketing your business. You're finding, bringing attention to potentially new customers. And you're making older customers maybe rediscover you or loyal customers even more happy, right? So there are so many reasons to just do this instead of just like, this is what we do each month and this is what, the pattern. Just throwing promotions in there makes sense. It's just not going to be exactly the same way it happens on a normal B2B, a normal B2C site, I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to be conscious of time here, so we'll probably have to wrap up soon. But let's talk a little bit more about programs and channels. We talked about social media a good amount. I think SEO's obviously got to be an obvious one that you have to constantly be investing in. You can't neglect it. I think it's just the key channel that you have to invest in. Like, if you don't take SEO seriously, like, I mean, what have you been doing, right? Like, it's just the basic channel that
it is. I mean, people have to, again, take a deep breath and step back. It's like, what is the web, right? Well, it's an organization of information, right? So you find the information, right? So, it's something where everybody knows it, but you sometimes have to step back and say, oh yeah, that's why SEO is so important. And gee, I'd invested so much in our story and all the content we produced and, all the stuff. SEO does matter a lot.
And I'm a big believer in educating yourself in SEO. Like, we don't try and charge a lot for SEO because I think the company should kind of own some of that. Like, it's, once you understand it and set up, maybe there's like an initial audit, or maybe we would charge for that initial analysis. But once you have like a process, you should be able to just kind of follow the process and stay up to, kind of slowly fine tune things and kind of move on the right track and slowly grow your content and your SEO as Google kind of trusts your site more. So I think that's just a very straightforward channel that it's like this mystery to a lot of people, but it's really not as complicated. There's some things that are complicated, but there's some things that haven't changed and are very simple, like page titles, meta descriptions. I mean, since I started my career, it's been the same thing pretty much. There's little changes here and there, but there's some stuff that just hasn't changed for 10 years. And so I think people think of it as this like crazy thing, but if you just spend a little bit of time, go read Maz's beginner guide to SEO or whatever, you're probably like already ahead of the competition just by like spending a couple of weeks on learning.
I mean, there's a joke. I mean, people make this in SEO. That I forget what the whole joke is, but it's basically like you can't always blame the algorithm, right? You know, it's like it's not just the way search engines work. It's really the work that you put in, right? There's
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's like obviously got to be a key channel. And then I think kind of Google AdWords and the paid goes at, part of that, because it's kind of like almost an extension of that, and you can kind of like rank, you can artificially rank for these paid terms. And that's something that I think you just have to, get good at and tweak and learn and start to see what works well for you. And I think for most companies, you can make it work in B2B. But the ones that I think are a lot more complicated to make work are the B2B influencers, the email. You wanted to kind of talk about some of the stuff, loyalty. Those are things that I don't think are as straightforward, because I think with Google AdWords and SEO, it's like there's proven strategies where it's like you do these things and it should work. You optimize for these keywords and it should it's not going to be perfect, but it should work. But like loyalty or email, I don't think it's as simple, because just sending out emails doesn't necessarily work, like you have to.
No, so, and again, each of these is a deep dive, but I'm going to hit on like a tip, maybe for each, just see if we can give something of value on these. So when you're talking about B2B influencers, it is kind of a weird mind thing for a lot of people, because, everyone thinks of like a Kim Kardashian or something, or influencer, right?
So you're saying she's not the main B2B influencer? Is that what
I don't think she is. Somehow I may be wrong. I don't think she is. He's not selling like plumbing supplies, right? But what happens is, almost in this, tying back to the scenario we were talking about before about doing like ADA retrofitting for buildings and stuff. People are passionate. They have a topic that they're passionate in, and they talk about it. So what are you connected to in your business? Find those people, right? It's that simple. Like you can go to the micro influencers who have like thousands of following, not millions, right? Go in that area and just see who's out there, and then start working with them and seeing if there's a mutually beneficial relationship.
It's almost like a partnership opportunity. And these people that might have 5,000, 10,000, or even 1,000 followers, like they're probably not going to charge you a whole lot to promote your product, or because, they're not millionaires or billionaires, type people. They're, they have a small niche following. But I totally agree. I mean, I've talked to some influencer companies, and they say that sometimes it's more effective to get these small influencers. Like, I think cars is a good example where people that sell, like do auto detailing, there's these like experts in these specific like car accessory places and or industries, and they might have like a very loyal like Instagram following of like these very specific car related things, right? And if you get them to promote your car part or whatever you do in that industry that's relevant, that could be really effective.
So that's number one, I'd say, for like how B2B influencers work. For email, what I would say is turn it on its head a little bit. Again, take out this whole promotional idea. Think of it as another way for you. You're acquiring people for your email list, but why are you doing that? You want to inform them of other things that you're doing. It is a newsletter. A lot of B2B people don't even do that, right? So say new clients in, new products coming, new services, new hires. Did you know our history? This sort of stuff. And go read this here on our blog. Go see this here in social media. Event next week. There's still such a value to that. And emails, as you know, are so profitable. So
they're one of the most highly profitable e-commerce channels, especially in B2C. And I think that can be used in B2B. Like you said, like at least get like a newsletter down, like get a monthly newsletter down, track the engagement, and like see if it's improving or working, and promote like a new product line like we do something similar where like we have kind of a structure, and we might promote a new site launch every newsletter or something that we can plug in every one, and it's like showing that, hey, like look at all the cool things we're doing, like we're not just sitting around.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to segue right over to loyalty to tie this to email, because what is loyalty for a B2B business? Well, sometimes It really is just finding who those most engaged customers are, right? Who are they? Why are they so engaged in what you do? What is their passion about what you do? What is the reason that they're buying every single month all the time and every new product? Or,
Yeah.
what is it? So what happens with loyalty is it's an identification program in a sense for B2B first. You're finding out who they are, and they're becoming something super critical to your business. You're listening to them. They're the sounding board. You can just work with them in a particular way. So it's not so much like the Starbucks rewards points where you're scanning your phone.
Yeah, so you're not saying like go put up a loyalty points program. You're not saying like don't just start with that.
Yeah, identify
your top customers first, basically.
Oh yeah, and then tie that to email. Like, what are they passionate about? Why are they engaged? Write about that in your newsletter, right? It's like all of these things can sing and be connected together. So if somebody says to me in B2B, oh, I would never do a loyalty program, I would sit down and say, let's just talk about it. And let's think what they are. What is the point of it? That's really what it is, like a customer advocacy group or something, right?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And then, yeah, it's almost like your premium customer group, like maybe it's like everyone that's spent over 100,000 or whatever it is that you like per year. You kind of like come up with some metrics and trying to analyze kind of who they are, where they are, what kind of companies they are. Talk to them, see what they want. Maybe they want that corporate account functionality, or they want that walkthrough of how to use the site better so that they can buy more or make it easier to buy, or like,
exactly.
Totally.
And then, and we have so much more, but I think our listeners will understand. We probably want to save some of this for future episodes in season 2.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're going to start getting into more of the tactical marketing, sales. I think this is where it gets really interesting, is tying the sales and marketing stuff into the operational side of things that we've been talking a lot about. Because obviously the operations doesn't work. You can't ship out the product, and you can't do anything if you can't get the product out. So a lot more to come on all this in season 2, and we'll have more and more exciting guests, and hopefully a lot more listeners too, right?
We have thousands. So I want to make sure people know that we've got thousands. We're actually doing better all the time. The word is catching on. I
was pretty surprised to see some reviews on Apple Podcasts. It's like, wow, those are like, I don't think they're just like my friends. I think those are people that are, just like the podcast and reviewing. So please review us. Please give us feedback, and we're definitely seeing a lot of traction, and it's exciting. So
it's a blast. I love doing it, and thank you to our listeners once again for tuning in. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim.
All right.